Hello, hello, hello! How was that?
Was that the big intro?
That was the big intro. I've been planning it for weeks. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Tanner. This is my dear friend
Sam.
And we've been doing this channel for a few years now. Started out as a way to process our leaving the LDS Church, Mormonism, and now we're just, talking about all kinds of things.
Yeah, very passionate about, critical thinking and deconstructing cults of personality and being your own guru and being mindful of undue influence. All things that are so relevant to the topic of today's video, which is Teal Swan.
Woohoo! Are y'all caught up on all the Teal Swan content? If not, this is your one-stop shop on the TLDR.
Fuck the Hulu documentary. It's all here, baby.
If you're like me and like a strong, powerful woman telling you what to do, you've probably come across Teal Swan videos in your YouTube and thought, this seems kind of nice. I like having someone give it to me straight. Someone like Teal Swan, who seems to know a lot about wellness, well-being, certainly has quite a following, which she's like up to millions now, isn't she?
Yeah, I mean, I immediately want to flag saying knows a lot is kind of a questionable statement.
All right. But,
I mean, yeah, as someone who's had Teal Swan videos pop up on their TikTok feed, I never really resonated with them, but like some of the clips I would get, I'd be like, yeah, that's true. Like a statement she'd make about childhood trauma informing the present, or, the fact that like modern suicide prevention techniques are pretty weak in a lot of cases and we need to like talk more openly about certain things. Like there are parts of Teal Swan's messaging that would come up on my TikTok feed, and it wasn't like I was like, oh, she's a cult leader or she's wrong, swipe away. I just wasn't drawn to her energy because she has quite a morbid presence. And though she is an objectively hot horse girl, that's not enough to keep me hooked.
We love a girl boss, don't get us wrong.
Horsey love a girl boss, giddy up, right? But I tend to vibe more with spiritual teachers who are kind of more positive and endearing and less, I just think people resonate with different things, and for some people, her darkness is part of the appeal. But that's not the case for me. So prior to watching the Hulu documentary, The Deep Dive, or listening to the Deep End, or the Gizmodo podcast, which I listen to on Spotify, that one's called The Gateway. Prior to that exposure, Teal Swan would just come up on my feed, and I kind of had her in my mind as someone who was maybe adjacent to sort of spiritual teachers I might like, but just not really my cup of tea. But now having taken a deeper dive, much different impression.
Yeah, the deep end is tough to swim in.
I also had the chance to interview one of Teal Swan's childhood best friends, Diana Rivera, for a Mormon Stories interview. So if you haven't watched that, we'll link that in the description box. That's a really fascinating interview. Also, John from Mormon Stories did an interview with one of Teal's ex-boyfriends or ex-husband. I'm not really sure what their official title was, but that interview is also a fascinating listen. And I feel like those two really give you a lot more insight. Well, especially the interview with Diana from growing up. You really get a sense of, like where present day Teal came from and sort of like how her strategies and stories and I suppose personality has evolved over the years.
Let's walk right through for people who haven't seen anything. Let's give the quick and dirty on Teal Swan.
So my impression of Teal Swan is that she grew up in Logan, Utah, and it seems to me, obviously like we are just like rando commenters on the internet, but it seems to me that she was exhibiting signs of one or several personality disorders at a young age, because she had a lot of intensity her whole childhood. She would lie, like, relentlessly. So when she was, like, a kid, she would tell her friend, Diana, oh, there's, like, a dog ghost in the ceiling and things like that. I will also say it's kind of hard to know where the line is between lying and her genuinely believing stuff, but there is definitely enough evidence of her knowingly lying that I would say it's probably a mix. I think there's grandiosity, obviously, that is, like, pretty rampant in Teal Swan, but I also think she will knowingly lie too. Anyway, she used to lie about a lot of things. Go watch the Diana interview for more on that, but she would lie about being an international model. It seems to me that it's possible, probable, I don't know, that she did experience some kind of early childhood trauma, maybe of a sexual nature, just because she was very hypersexual at a young age. Yeah. So that's sort of a question mark I have. Like, I would be surprised if it was all just genetic personality disorder, but I also don't know enough about like personality disorders and the sort of nature versus nurture of that to know. But it wouldn't be surprising if she had experienced some kind of early sexual assault. But her sort of founding story as a spiritual leader is that she was part of a satanic ritual abuse cult for like, I think she says 13 years. She's also tried to convince other people, including Diana, that they were a part of this cult with her, and, you know, watched babies get sacrificed on grills and like all kinds of stuff, and you'll see that in the documentary a bit
in
as
between
well.
trips to
In between modeling in Paris, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so she seems like someone who, you know, whichever way you look at it, like has suffered in her life, but I see her as a victim of a bad mental health system. Because once she was about, I actually can't remember
like
the exact
19,
age.
21, 20.
Yeah, as a sort of later teenager, she basically went to a therapist called Barbara Snow, I believe, and was involved in a type of therapy that is like repressed memory recovery, which has since been discredited by the American Medical Association, I think, and among many other like psychological organizations.
Pretty much
of
anyone
reputation.
who's like studying science of mind
Yeah.
is like, that's not how memory works. That's just not it.
Yeah, it's like this bogus view of memory that we know is not accurate, where like your memories lie in this like perfectly preserved chest, and if you can just find the right key to unlock it, it will just come out fully, you know, exactly intact, and that's just not how neuroscientists view memory at this point in science. So like repressed memory recovery therapy, debunked, has caused a lot of harm. There's so many good resources we can link you to, because I feel like this is like a rich topic, you know, like we could spend a long time just talking about repressed memory recovery therapy. Sorry if I'm using the wrong term. But the You're Wrong About podcast did some really good episodes on the satanic panic, so that's worth looking up into. But yeah, so basically Teal Swan, throughout her childhood, as I understand it, her parents were taking her to therapists and trying to figure out like what's the deal with this child, because she was so extreme, and, you know, she would make claims as a kid like she was the goddess of sex and she was an alien and all kinds, kind of very like Joseph Smith. Well, actually, I don't know. Joseph Smith would make up stories about Native American people as a kid, but I don't know that he
didn't seem as like
he didn't necessarily
It is interesting. I've met with several people who, including people I've taught on the mission, who exhibited schizoaffective qualities, and the international modeling is a common theme, and it's any kind of delusion will put you in the worst victimhood and also the most exalted. You know, so it's like on the one end you're the target of the most evil organization that could ever exist, while also being lauded as the hottest, most desirable person
because
alive.
I mean the two extremes of the ego, inferiority and superiority. It's like Teal Swan, she was, you know, the most brutally sexually assaulted you could imagine. Like, she tells stories of being snatched from her parents night after night by this guy and sold to, prostituted out to like multiple men in the course of one night. So anyway, she paints a picture that she was, you know, the victim of the worst sex abuse possible, but then also was the goddess of sex. And she says that she came to Earth sort of in this form, so that because she believes her form is like universally hot, basically, and so that is part of her shtick.
So it's hard to say, you know, she's just like a malicious liar. Like you said, the line may be blurry, and we don't have to judge her intent to say that there are just some basic... There's incontinuity in her story. We can say that's just absolutely not true. And whether she believes it or not we don't have to determine that. We don't have to be like, oh, she's just making it all up. She could just actually be ill, and either way, it's just not true.
And that's kind of another thing is with lying, it's not always black and white whether someone knows they're lying or not. Like, that is also something that can sort of like bleed, you know, like someone can sort of have a vague sense that they're lying and then also think it's true. Like, I feel like I experienced that as a kid. Sometimes you would tell a lie and you like sort of do come to believe it. So like the brain can do that. But another thing worth noting is that there are times when it does just seem so blatant that she's lying. So for example, her childhood friend Diana Ribera did this Mormon Stories interview, and then Teal did a response video with another one of our friends. I think her name was Lindsay. And she said in the video, this is the only friend I've ever had, like basically just saying like I was never friends with Diana, when it's like there's photographic proof that you two were friends. Like you live next door to each other. Your families were like concerned about how much time you were spending together. So there's times when she does like a Donald Trump level of lying where it's not just like that's not true, it then goes another level and it's like I'm the least racist person in the world. And it's like you could have just done like a smaller version that would have been more believable in my mind. Like you maybe could have downplayed how close you were, but to say that you just weren't friends just seems like an absurd. But I also feel like another common phenomenon with these types of cult leaders, and I do consider her a cult leader at this point, is as cult leaders' power grows, I feel like they often do become like less aligned with reality and things. I don't know, I feel like the grandiosity blooms even more, especially if there's like sort of a personality disorder level of grandiosity to begin with.
Because she is successful, so she can say, like, if this weren't real, if I weren't telling the truth, this wouldn't be happening, right?
But it does just seem like she's always told lies to a level that is, like, pretty wild. Like, there's sort of people you know who can kind of lie a bit, but then there's, like, another level of lying where it's like, you expected people to believe that you're an international model when, like, you're always here.
So, Teal Swan, having gone through all this, at some point starts making videos online. Well, first taking clients as like a spiritual mentor, the first of whom ended up committing suicide.
Was that her first client?
Yeah, very first client. Ended up committing suicide.
And that's Leslie?
I think.
I did not know that was her first client.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been, I think this has happened more than once, but I'm pretty sure it's happened more than once, where she has led people to have these recovered memories, which is very interesting because from talking to Diana had a situation where she met up with Teal in, I think, her early 20s, and Teal tried to convince her that there was all this stuff she didn't remember, and they were in this cult together for like 10 years, and they watched babies get killed and all this stuff. And Diana talks about how, I mean, it's very obvious when you hear Diana's story that there was like a power differential in their childhood friendship. Teal was a few years older. Diana was a lot more like vulnerable and impressionable. Teal was very strong-willed and like, this is how things are. You need to try alcohol, you know, when she's 13 and Diana's 10, things like that. But Diana talked about how even just thinking there's a possibility that these things might be true that Teal was telling her, even though she had no recollection or like logical reason to think that they would be true, even just that sense of uncertainty and that feeling of like, I can't trust myself, I can't trust my own mind, I can't trust my own reality, drove her to suicidal ideation. You know, it can just drive a person mad is basically what I'm saying. So it's not... And this is why recovered memory therapy is so dangerous, because again, it's like getting people to doubt their own reality in a way that makes them feel so unstable that there's like, they feel like there's nothing they can cling on to, you know? So I feel like it's not surprising that that's led to people taking their own lives.
Absolutely.
Because Diana has described how it, even though she didn't believe Teal, that there was a piece of her that kind of entertained the idea, because Teal was such a strong personality type and Diana was kind of a vulnerable person who'd had a long history with like disordered eating and mental health issues, and it took her to that dark place. Which,
if she were to check in with Teal Swan, would be, you know, the eating disorders and things would be the result of these deeply repressed memories. And this is kind of the problem that I have in general with a lot of New Age healing and things like this is the abstractification of so many things. It's like, oh, I have an eating disorder. It must be the repressed memory of the time I was in a cult or a past life where I was a baker in the 1600s and I had a horrible time. You know, it's like there's enough in your everyday, just in your life, in your childhood, to explain perfectly why you relate to the world in this way and why you're dysfunctional in this way, that don't have to be a past life or a deep repressed memory. Like
it's very appealing to imagine that there's this sort of magic pill or silver bullet that can kind of explain all of it, versus kind of doing the slower, more boring, less glamorous, more unsexy like healing work that we all have to do. Because I mean, even someone who hasn't experienced like any quote unquote massive trauma, like, you know, sexual assault or something that we like consider like noteworthy, I think just like growing up, there's just trauma that happens regardless, because there's like ways that you're expected to sort of repress your true nature or, you know, fit in with whatever family, culture, society you're supposed to fit into. there's like an innate like denying of your own reality that tends to happen in most people's childhoods, like as they're being taught to like fit into these boxes of their culture, which I think is traumatic just on its own. Like I feel like there's just a baseline of trauma that all humans experience, even the ones who have like relatively good lives. Yeah,
we live in a largely dysfunctional society that compounds suffering in people, so of course we're going to have maladaptive behaviors in trying to conform to those systems. So it's like, yeah, of course. And it doesn't help by being like, oh, the reason I'm doing this is because I was the King of England in 1500s. Like, that may give you like a little egoic boost, but doesn't really help you address the root and therefore the solution in dealing with it. It just kind of like displaces it. And with Teal Swan specifically, it was kind of horrifying. So if you haven't seen the docuseries on Hulu, The Deep End,
really
I went into it being like, I don't want to just be like, oh, a powerful woman, she's probably a horrible monster.
Me too. And I
really wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt.
I know, in the beginning episodes, I was kind of like, I got the impression that like, oh, this is like a well-intentioned but slightly misguided woman who does genuinely want to heal people.
And granted, I can't imagine the pressure of having a camera crew follow you around recording everything you say. Of course, as I was watching, I was like, I would never say that in any circumstance.
I know, like you still knew there was a camera there, and you still, as much as we can talk about editing, and there's so much about documentary making, like we're always watching documentaries, I feel like, through the lens of like, how are they crafting a narrative? We're very aware of that. But there are just things that you see Teal saying to other human beings on camera that's like, you said that. Like, you said that thing. You can't really...
They didn't splice up that.
Editing,
Like, someone who just has an unquestioning trust in their own perspective as being superior to everyone else's all the time. Like, that is always such a turn off to me. A true spiritual teacher doesn't need to toot their horn and be like, I'm the best there ever was. I'm the next Jesus. I'm the, they're just there, and like they don't need the adulation. They don't have to persuade you. It's like the Trump phenomenon of like, I have to confirm my own credentials. It's like a super smart person doesn't have to tell you that they're super smart. You'll know.
Yeah.
And I feel like spirituality is the same way. Like, it's like, oh, you don't think I'm the most spiritual person? Well, I'm gonna attack you right now. It's like, the most spiritual person doesn't even need to be seen as the most spiritual person, because they're just like, they have their own ways of regulating their nervous system, which is a huge part of what all that is.
I feel like any spiritual teacher worth their salt knows not to center themselves, because especially because human beings are so vulnerable to falling into cults of personality, and even spiritual teachers that are like right on the money about stuff, people are still gonna turn them into a cult of personality. Like, sometimes even non-culty spiritual teachers, whatever you want to call them, can still attract a cult-like following. So I feel like every person who's trying to be sort of a spiritual teacher figure should be mindful of that, and should be putting out messaging that is dissuading people from that, because it is such a like classic thing that humans do. Like, we love cult leaders. We're so horny for strongmen. So I feel like if you're a good spiritual teacher, you tell your followers to sort of check you, I know some people can do that in a manipulative way that isn't actually genuine.
I was going to say, I guarantee you, and I think Teal even makes statements as such, like, this isn't about following me, it's not about lining up and being part of the Teal tribe, or getting the matching tattoo.
It's not about the matching tattoos.
Though it does help.
I mean, this is one of the big issues that we have with her, is she does encourage like cult-like obedience to her, and there's multiple scenes in the documentary that show that, and in all the Teal Swan media I've been consuming has really highlighted that. Like, when that British guy at a retreat asks Teal Swan, are there any spiritual leaders you look up to, and she was like, that's an absurd question, because you wouldn't ask the fastest runner on the earth who they look up to. And it's like, well, number one, you probably could, and they should still be able to cite other people that inspire them, even if like they've done the fastest mile, But she was so, she was so triggered by being asked this question of, like, who else inspires you? And then the guy kind of followed up by being like, so there's no one who you feel like could check you, or, is even, like, on your level, who could, like, question
give you
anything
feedback.
You say or do. And she's just completely offended by that question, which, again, someone as far as I'm concerned, is not enlightened, has not reached some higher spiritual status when they're that triggered by their superiority being questioned. Like, that's 101. If you have that much of a superiority complex, I don't see you as an enlightened spiritual teacher, because I feel like that's like one of the core things about becoming more enlightened.
And I guarantee you the fastest runner in the world has a running coach.
I know.
They all do.
I'm not doing it alone.
What I was going to say about the documentary is that, she says just some things that I'm like, even without the spooky music, even without a cut to her looking creepily through a window that may have been manufactured.
Yeah,
like,
which we can
just
tell
the
is
things
editing.
that she is saying, the way that she is interacting with other human beings is so off-putting, because it shows that, like, absolute need for control, like her inner circle having like sign a thing that they won't have significant relationships without her approval, that
they won't
like
set any personal boundaries that might affect Teal Swan in any way. Yeah, when you see the contract she made her inner circle of disciples sign, I mean, that really hit home. Also, the private investigator that she hired
to find out if she was a cult or not.
Why did she hire her?
To prove, just to be like, we'll get an investigator in here to finally put to rest the rumors that we're a cult.
So for those of you who don't know, she hires this private investigator who is a fan of her teachings, to unpack these accusations that are being made against her about her being a catalyst for people's suicides and being a cult leader, whatever. And you watch this private investigator, Molly, essentially go through a faith crisis. You can, like, it's kind of sad and stressful because, like, coming from a Mormon background, like, I was so familiar with, like, what she was feeling in that moment of, like, oh, shit. Like, you could see her uncovering information. Also, I really respected the way that Molly was able to just, like, stay intellectually honest with herself, because that's not always easy in a situation like that, especially when you've been hired by the cult leader themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The reality is, even if you're doing really important work, and there's lots of people doing the important work, and that's why one of the things that Teal Swan seems so, like, off-putting is it's all about her, and this is my way, there's no other way, I'm the best one doing this, no one even comes up to my toes. Like,
no one else can do what I'm
there's
doing.
no other therapy that could have worked for these people, and actually, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of different approaches for a lot of different people. Acceptance commitment therapy may not be the right thing for the person who needs cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's just different people, different times, and just being like, no, my thing for everyone all the time, otherwise they just deserve to die, and there was nothing that was going to save them. Like, that's their total attitude. So, but, not only that is, like, she's so careless with the way that she's doing it, which was so surprising to me, because it's not just her walking people through these things and being like, oh, maybe you had a thing, maybe you were in a satanic ritual, satanic
your
cult,
dad
just like
abused
me.
you for 4 years.
It's not even like that. It's she's getting other people who are just vulnerable people on the verge of suicide, who come as their, like, last straw, last ditch attempt to salvage their life, show up to this retreat. And then she has them working together to channel each other's dead relatives.
And living relatives.
And so to explain the problems that they're now facing, which is so careless and bizarre. Because you have these people who are like, okay, I'm just going to do improv now, and I'm going to be your dad. And she tells them, no, it's not like you're just pretending. It's not like even you're taking their energy. You are that them. Person's you dad. Are their dad.
So in case it's unclear what we're saying, basically she'll have these retreats where people will get in groups, and then one person, let's say Tanner's going through it, I'll be channeling the energy of his mum, he'll be playing himself as a kid or something, and then we'll play out this scene that it isn't seen as just like an improv, it's seen as like you are channeling something real that happened. And then me, the person who's never met Tanner before this retreat, might say after, as I was channeling your mum, I really got the sense that she sexually abused you for a few years. And then Tanner would just be like, okay, well, I guess that's what happened.
Because I'm at a Teal Swan retreat.
Untrained, random other vulnerable people with these suicidal tendencies and mental health issues. It's not even just Teal Swan, which is, I mean, that's disturbing enough alone. And I could get into, it's so disturbing how she's tried to convince Diana and others that they were, part of a satanic cult that they weren't a part of, or among other things. She's always trying to, like, control other people's narratives for them. Big piece of Teal Swan. But yeah, having just, like, random other people do it too.
So dangerous.
And then that just becomes truth. And then, of course, like, if you start, you've always had a pretty good relationship with your parents. Maybe they were sucked in some ways when you were a kid, but, like, they've never sexually assaulted you. And then you start thinking that they sexually assaulted you. That's going to really, like, especially if you're already suicidal when you're showing up to the retreat, I mean, you are just putting already vulnerable people into, like, you could potentially just, like, unhinge them so far that they will kill themselves.
Literally driving people into insanity. That's what insanity is. It's you're not able to grasp what is real and what isn't. And if you're like all of a sudden, not even just, I mean, there is a way that you can do hypnosis or EMDR, whatever methodology you're using to get into that really relaxed state where you're reevaluating your experiences and things. Putting someone in that just alone, giving them ideas about things that may have happened and giving them and making that feel real to them.
Kind of giving their psyche a space to explore. Like what comes up when you know, like
But then it's like one thing to do that as an
with
untrained, like as just an untrained YouTuber. Like we're not going to tell people to do that. So, but then to let other people do that for you, of course is going to drive people to insanity because now all of a sudden they have no idea what to believe.
And again, it all feels like Teal Swan has clearly, she has commanded control of people throughout her life, and that is something that is a complex for her. Like she clearly wants to like control others, and you see that in patterns of behavior that began when she was a child, which is why I'm inclined to think there's personality disorders involved. I just feel like anyone who seeks that kind of control over other people's psyches and narratives disturbs me, because I do life coaching, and I just feel like as a life coach you've got to have the mindset of like, if anything I say doesn't resonate, like seriously throw it out. I'm only as useful as the things I'm saying resonate with you. Sorry, I said that in a dumb way, but you know what I'm saying. It's like you should never be looking to a life coach or anyone to tell you what to do, to tell you what's true for you. They should just be there to help kind of like facilitate general exploration, give you like a safe space to, you know, get curious maybe about your past and like what patterns might be there. But it shouldn't be any more than that, you know, especially because like coaching is not therapy. Like Teal Swan is not a therapist. She is just like no different from me as far as I know. Yeah, she's just like a random life coach. And she also, it's worth noting, has been, she got in trouble with the law basically for practicing therapy without a license. But then she moved to Costa Rica. And so then her partner, Blake, basically
old Jim Jones maneuver, huh?
Classic, right? Then, I know, cult leaders always got to be on the move. Every time. But yeah, so basically the state of Utah sent her a letter and was like, hey, like, you got to stop doing this. And then...
If Utah is calling you
I
out.
know. And then they got a reply that was basically like, well, she's in Costa Rica now, so this is irrelevant. So, I mean, it didn't deter her. Also, something that is really worth noting is Teal Swan sees her methods of, like, past life regression, all this stuff. She sees her methods as, like, so groundbreaking, never before been done, like, the modern medical establishment isn't ready for them. But the truth is that all of her ideas have at some point been, like, used in therapy and then since debunked. Like, I need to...
Or there is a form of it that is valuable, like improv therapy, like EMDR...
Yeah, but like someone, I need to find the comment. It's going to take too long for me to find it. But someone wrote out this comment in reply to the Mormon Stories episode we did with Diana and basically cited like, here's Teal's method, here's the way it's been used in the past, like in 1971, and then here's why it was discredited. Like these methods are not like the groundbreaking things that she thinks they are. And also they're not her methods, you know, like she got into repressed memory therapy through Barbara Snow, who, has she been discredited? I think she...
Oh, largely, yeah. That's one of the reasons, the gateway goes into that.
Okay, yeah.
Quite a bit.
Sorry, it all mixes together at a certain point. But yeah, it's like, the things she's doing are not, like, never before been done methods. They're like methods that have been done and for good reason have been done away with.
The Teal Swan thing is kind of like the Jordan Peterson effect, where at like a cursory glance you're like, okay,
make your bed, that does help.
I like, for instance, I think there is a need to talk about suicide with more frankness. There's suicide in my family history, and it's always been like a very present topic in my mind and in my life. And so like that kind of thing is like, it's refreshing to see someone trying to meet that need of talking about it more directly. But then the more you go through it, the more you're like, oh, everything good that's being said is ideas taken from other people, like Jordan Peterson. But then all the unique ideas are actually really, really bad.
Yeah, and that's kind of...
And the applications of them are really dangerous.
That's why I never vibe with like this mindset that some ex-Mormons will have, for example, of like, well, there are some good things in the church. Because I'm like, yeah, but if those good things are used to like prop up the bad things because they're, you know what I mean, then like how useful is it? Like if you have like a few true teachings that can on their own be really helpful, but they lead people down a path of all these other teachings that are really dangerous, then they're just being used in the service of bad. So then they're like unhelpful, you know. It's not necessarily that amazing when like the Mormon, it is, I like when the Mormon church will like say things that are healthy, like, I don't know, having an attitude of gratitude. I'm trying to think of something that would be universally appreciated. Like gratitude is proven by science to be healthy and good for you and great. But then it's like, if it's being used in the service of like repressing all the issues with the church and repressing homophobia, then it's just like...
Not allowed to have a single critical thought, only gratitude.
Yeah. So you can say that anyone has good ideas, but it's like, again, I feel like there's been a million spiritual teachers throughout history that have had some good ideas. But how many people have had good ideas and then exploited their power that they've gained through peddling some of those ideas among bad ones?
And that's the interesting thing about cults is we can see cults everywhere and nobody thinks they're in a cult precisely because they think like, oh, if I was in a cult, I'd know because it would be bad. And it's like, that's literally not how it works. Cults are always give you something. They're meeting some desire or need.
Yeah.
And making you feel good things so that you follow and you give them your money and you go to the retreats and you let them cut you off from your family so that you can serve longer in the organization. You know, it's the same pattern, and they work because they make you feel good things because there are some good things that they say, or you know.
And I would even say a lot of people in cults, and I feel like we kind of experience this in Mormonism, you maybe get like somewhat of a sense that you're in sort of a cult thing, or you hear accusations that you're in a cult, but you think, well, if I am, then it's good because I'm having a good time and this is serving me. And I mean, I've talked a lot about how, you know, I joined Mormonism at 16, 17, and that was my psyche seeking out something that it needed, which was a sense of belonging and community and structure. And like, we as humans, I mean, we are somewhat good at getting our needs met, but it's just like when you're vulnerable, you don't have like discernment in the way that you would if you're in a healthier place to pick up on undue influence and stuff. So if you're so thirsty for belonging, then like you will ignore the red flags of an organization because the belonging will be so fulfilling and will be meeting such a big like core need that like it's survival, you know. And it makes sense because it's like, well, if there's not another thing there giving you a way to meet that need, why not go with Teal Swan or the Mormon Church or whatever? It's like you're gonna take whatever you can get in situations like that.
And that's where the line here becomes quite blurred between meeting the need of vulnerable people versus targeting vulnerable people to exploit. And the LDS Church, they teach the missionaries in the Preach My Gospel handbook to look for people who are going through hard, difficult things and to use that and twist it to get, you know, oh, you had someone die in your family recently? Very interesting. We've got a message just about that. And Teal Swan, her old marketing director, who seemed like a really intelligent person, it was someone who I was like, oh, I would love to have a conversation with them. They seem really sharp. Was talking about that, how it's not just like, oh, there's a bunch of vulnerable, suicidal people who we're here to offer them the healing balm. It's like, no, that's like a target market who is going to be more susceptible to a message, more easily impressionable, more easily, more easy to extract and to, you know, oh, this $6,000 retreat. That's the thing that'll finally give you life and community, being part of the Teal tribe or whatever. And he goes into that, how that's a very conscious decision and a little bit.
Because didn't she openly say in the documentary that she wants to be as big as the Pope?
Yeah.
Which again, for me, it's a red flag when a spiritual teacher aspires to be kind of like the most influential person in the world. I feel like people that are useful spiritual teachers generally have the mindset of like, yeah, I mean, I do want to help as many people as possible and I do want to get these ideas out there, but I feel uncomfortable with like, you know, again, gathering like a cult-like following, or I don't want people to put me on a pedestal, or, you know, that to me is like a healthy way if you are someone who feels drawn to being a spiritual teacher, which sometimes I feel like even being drawn to it can be problematic. It's all dependent. Another thing that is worth pointing out, a pattern you see in the documentary, in the Gizmodo podcast, from Diana, from other people, is Teal, she cuts people off from their family a lot, which again, it's so weird how cults will always follow the same patterns, but like
in new, funkier, fresher ways.
Yeah, it's like there is an archetype of person who has like grandiosity and like seeks power and all this stuff like a Teal Swan. I guess it's because they are tapping into truths about humans, which is like humans are horny for cult leaders. And they're like, you know, you can, from Teal Swan's early childhood, you can tell that she was like figuring out how to manipulate people at a young age. But anyway, it's interesting to me because it's so many people that go to Teal Swan's retreats will, you know, have these memories uncovered where they were sexually assaulted by their parents, and then Teal Swan really encourages them to cut off their parents. So again, like isolating people from their loved ones who previously had good relationships with their loved ones. Classic cult stuff, right?
To make you more dependent.
Yeah.
On the person offering you the solution.
Yeah, whereas I feel like a healthy sort of, I mean, it's obviously super valid to cut off your parents if you feel like they're an unhealthy presence in your life, and some people do have like genuine trauma where it's like there's not a way they can make that work for them. It's too triggering. But I would say generally, I feel like a good spiritual teacher is wanting to sort of inspire healthier boundaries with people in your life who maybe are challenging for you to interact with, but they're not just like cut them out, cut everyone out. Like that to me is not like an enlightened spiritual perspective, and you know, sometimes it's necessary, but most, you know, I feel like most people's parents sucked in at least some ways, and you gotta come around to realizing that they're just humans doing their best in the culture that they grew up in, and like they probably did better than their parents, and that feels like the general attitude to have about parents. But it feels like with Teal Swan, she's so hell-bent on getting people to cut themselves off from their family members, and is doing it through these methods that are getting people to have like fabricated memories that some other rando on the retreat has told them that happened to them.
Don't even know how to yes and.
God, yeah. I think Teal Swan has been walking back some... She made this statement in that, I think it was in the Gizmodo podcast, where she said, see the stuff that comes up just as a possibility, which, I mean, is obviously massively healthier than being like, this is fact. But I still feel like that's like a response to outrage, and like it hasn't changed her grandiosity or superiority.
That's the thing, is we kind of touched on this already about how it's not like it's all just movie magic, Hollywood manipulation of like, ooh, they cut these scenes together to make it look really bad. It's like, you can tell that she doesn't she's not registering that the stuff she is saying is fundamentally flawed.
Yes.
And overtly coercive, overtly manipulative.
So in her mind, she's like, it's being taken out of context, but to, you know, sort of a healthy person watching, you're like, there's not a context where that would be a healthy thing to say. There is no context.
There's no context in which someone disagreeing with me is like, you're my enemy now. Like, I'm just not going to say shit like that.
Also, just random tidbit, but she has a pattern of telling people to kill themselves when they sort of like go against her. Like she said it to like at least 2 ex-partners, I think. It seems suicide is clearly like a big theme for her, and I can't help but feel that it's, you know, it's representative of her own psyche, and I feel like a lot of the stuff that she'll say to people is like a projection of her own sort of like fears and darkness within her, because it also seems like she's very, I mean, usually you expect spiritual teachers to at least be able to sort of like fake emotional non-reactivity in certain situations, but she doesn't try and fake it. She's very much like, will have a massive outburst, and I guess I'm sort of surprised that her inner circle doesn't see that as like a red flag, or because to me an enlightened person is not going to have massive outbursts every time they're mildly criticized, but they just seem to see it as all part of it with her. Because
that's the thing, is she's not just like offering a system or whatever. She like, in her mind, she has like magical powers. She can see everybody's history and knows all their past lives. Oh, it's so disturbing on the Gateway podcast to hear a girl going through the program and being told like, I've had a good relationship with my parents, like it's only been the last few years that things have gotten dark, and Teal's like, nope, I know that you have a deep dark history that not even you know about it, and if you keep coming, we're going to work through that together. And it's like, that is so scary, because again, she has, like, they all have to believe that she has superpowers, essentially. She's not just a normal teacher, she's the next Christ. And you can't be a successful cult leader really without cutting people off from loved ones, because it's like loved ones are sort of like the primary way that people like keep the madness in check with joining cults, and if you can get them to just cut off their family,
then they need the belonging even more. They're more basically, she just encourages rampant psychological dependency on her and wants it that way and views that as like the best route for people. Like she believes only she can save people.
And always with cults, that's not apparent right off the bat. It's not like, oh, I've seen a Teal Swan video where she's telling me I need to cut off my parents. Like, that's never how it is. It's always a funnel, and the closer you get to the person, and the whole thing is set up to draw in people, to make them more dependent, more interested, so that they can devote more money and more time. And then the closer you get to the person in the center, the more chaotic and spooky it all is. And that's exactly how it is with her. The closer you get, the more control she has to have. And it's like people who are doing good work don't need that amount of control. You don't need a tight circle of 8 people who aren't allowed to question you, who have to be on call 24/7, who aren't allowed to have relationships or go on trips. Like, that is an insane level of control that nobody needs, not even the Pope. Like,
wouldn't that help our channel a lot, though, if we just had 8 really devoted
super
friends?
Devoted interns. And that's the thing about Teal Swan, too. It's
fighting
like,
each other for the top spot.
when people are like, when that guy was like, who can check you? She's sitting there with a room of people who are supposed to be her friends, and who, like, if someone asked me that, I'd be like, well, Samantha, when I'm acting out, she'll be like, you idiot. Like, easy. Like, at least you want, even if you don't have someone who's, like, way better and smarter than you, you can at least have peers.
That's
but in
the
her mind,
thing,
it's like she only has
by...
people who, like, just, like, kiss the ground that she walks on, who are total yes men.
Even the idea of someone being on the same level as her is offensive. Not even, like, superior. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, kind of coming back to the whole, every cult leader teaches some good stuff. I feel like I've seen some comments or got some messages from people who were like, Teal Swan really helped me when I was going through blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, with a lot of cult leaders, you know, Joseph Smith, even fucking Brigham Young, like, you could find some quotes that in an hour of darkness could help you, you know? And the stuff that people are, there's kind of a pyramid of extremeness, and, like, the stuff that's being the most widely disseminated is probably not going to be the most, like, niche, you know, off-the-wall ideas. It's, like, the people in the inner circle at the peak of the pyramid who are getting, like, the cultiest experience. And then it's, like, the people at the retreats are getting, like, a more culty experience than, obviously, just, like, her random TikTok subscribers. So, you know, there are levels to this. So it's like, if you're someone who just maybe occasionally watches her on YouTube, it might not be unhealthy, because, you know, she's saying stuff that is helping you to sort of dig into your own psyche a little bit, and maybe you're finding that useful. Like, you know, it's kind of like how I found Mormonism really helpful for 5 years, and it, like, helped me with a lot of mental suffering, and, you know, was beneficial in certain ways. Like, just because someone can benefit your life doesn't, like, take away the, like, you know, the fact that they're a cult leader. The fact that it's still an unhealthy system, and you maybe are just getting, like, the tip of the iceberg of, like, their whole shtick. And so maybe that is fine because you're a generally healthy person who's not too susceptible to just getting sucked right in. But it is, like, sad seeing the people in the documentary who have got so sucked in. Like, when she basically...
a tattoo on his hand saying, what is it, I shall not tell lies,
my God,
something,
yeah.
like, what is true, because she was constantly telling him that he was lying to her, and he's like, what's going on?
He also talked about, that interview is so fascinating, we will put it in the description box, it's the one with her ex. He also talked about how she, whenever they'd hang out with her parents, she'd be like, don't bring up the origin story, basically, you know, that she was in this satanic cult led by this one guy. She was like, don't bring that up. And, like, he
the elephant in the room.
And then she would often say things to him like, everyone's going to know that I'm a fraud. Or, like, she did seem to have this, like, sense that she was lying in certain ways, because she was doing damage control to make sure that lies didn't come up in a setting where they would be debunked, you know, such as around her family, who obviously knows that, like, she wasn't snatched every night in the middle of the night, you know.
So pretty much everything good you can get from Teal Swan, like the Jordan Peterson thing, is like everything good that they're saying, other people are saying.
Yeah.
And you can get that elsewhere.
Yeah. There isn't really, unless you're, like, a very niche, highly specialized physicist or something, I feel like there are not good ideas that only one person is advocating for. Do you know what I'm saying?
No,
like,
yes.
Especially when it comes to life advice. Like, if an idea is good, a bunch of people are talking about it. And same with Teal Swan. Like, she may think that her ideas are so original, but, like, anything she's saying that is good, thousands of people are talking about that stuff all the time. There's, like, no need to go to her.
And it's funny to, and I am guilty of this too, of, you know, you start approaching topics that you're not like qualified to be an expert on, but you're still going to weigh in with your opinion, right? Like, we've all done it.
We've all done
but to pass it off as you are the most knowledgeable
Yeah.
and nobody comes up, nobody is where you're at. No one can even fathom where you're at. And then to see her like explain, like the guy was like, oh, what does that mean, quantum healing? And she's like, well, everything exists simultaneously. So you draw from the quantum into this, and like that's it. And you're like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But like asserts it. It's just a lot.
Anytime someone is like, it's too complicated, you'd never understand it, like red flag, Again, unless we're working with like a physicist or something where it's like, yeah, I would genuinely not understand that.
Anyway, so that's Teal Swan. Be careful what you consume on the internet, where you give your money. What retreats you go to.
Patreon.com/Self on the Shelf. We won't ask you to do anything. We won't tell you anything about your past.
That is some. I love what we do, because we don't have to have people buy into like some extraordinary claim. No. It's like you either laugh at what we're doing and enjoy the experience, or you don't. There's no added. It's like Alan Watts. He's like, I'm not trying to sell. I'm an entertainer, and if this perspective entertains you, that's my job. But do follow us on Patreon. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we do bonus videos there, and also we just really appreciate the support on the channel. I guess this has just been like our general overview of Teal Swan and our thoughts and what has come to mind watching all the content. Yeah, we'd love to hear what you think.
Check out the interview that Samantha did on Mormon Stories, as well as the other ones that Mormon Stories has done. If you have any anecdotes, experiences, perspectives you would like to share, sound off in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe, and of course, follow us on Patreon. And
you'll get access to the Akashic Records.
We don't even have to threaten you with damnation or anything. If you like it, then sign up. Hey, love you. Bye.